James was very happy to be able to release the new house that his parents had bought. The one they had before he liked better, but he didn't dislike this one. The neighborhood was also good. There were several boys and girls, so he had someone to play with and not be alone. After finishing his homework, he was given permission to go out with the other boys. They played ball, hide and seek. They always had a good time. Until one day they began to bother him by telling him that the new house in which he lived was possessed. They said that two twins lived there, a boy and a girl, who lived in separate rooms. The events had begun in the girl's room. At night, the lights were constantly on and off, as if there was an electrical failure. After several nights, the girl's skin became very pale and she felt sick. Her parents, worried, took her to the doctor, but he said that physically the girl had nothing. He believed that her discomfort was psychological, so they decided to take the little girl to a psychologist. After that day, the neighbors stopped seeing the little girl. It wasn't known if she was admitted to a psychiatric center or if something happened to her and she died, but the minor was never mentioned again. James didn't buy that story. Surely it was a story that people had invented to create fear. That day was very special for him. His parents would soon arrive with a little sister. The day his parents told him that he would no longer be an only child, he didn't know how to react. He was going to stop being the king of the house, and he would have to learn to share his toys and his parents with another girl. But soon he began to understand how positive it would be. Being the older brother carried many responsibilities, and he would be a role model for the baby. He would be in charge of teaching her what is good and what is bad. Besides, he could always have someone at home to play with. Later, he heard the sound of the key in the door. His grandmother, who had stayed to take care of him, approached the door and saw his parents brought a baby in their arms. His mother looked at him with a smile and leaned in so he could meet his sister. Her name was Sarah. She was very small. He had never seen a baby of that size. He kissed her forehead, and the baby seemed to smile at him. His parents were very happy to see him act like that. After, his mother told him, "James, remember that now that you're the older brother, you'll have to sleep in the new room. Yours will go to Sarah." The little boy had almost forgotten. Some time ago, his parents had told him that when the baby arrived, he would change rooms. At first, he liked the idea very much. His parents told him that they would paint it the color he liked the most, and that they would buy him some new furniture as an older boy. However, ever since some neighborhood boys told him the scary story of the demon-possessed girl, he didn't like the change of rooms so much. Since that room was precisely where the protagonist of the story slept. Days later, James and his father painted the walls of their new room. He had chosen the color yellow, his favorite. It was much bigger than the previous one. Now, it would have more space to play. The new furniture and curtains arrived. The room was worthy of a report in a decoration magazine. It was beautiful. It was so modern that they even installed security cameras. They wanted to renovate the entire home and equip it with all the new technologies to feel safer. James remembered the story of the demon-possessed girl. The boys had told him that the light in her room went on and off for no reason. He checked the switch and it worked perfectly. He convinced himself that it was just an urban legend. His parents' room was right next door, and he knew that if they were close, nothing would ever happen to him. The little one spent the first week sleeping in his new room. His friends, when they found out, asked him if he had felt something strange, but he told them no. He didn't know if his neighbors were really worrying, or if they were just trying to scare him. Suddenly, a very pale, blonde, light-eyed girl passed by the group of children. She approached James and said, "James, I just want to tell you to be careful." Then she ran away without the boy being able to answer or ask her anything. Who was? And why did she know his name? That night, he was very restless. He could not fall asleep. All the time, the girl's face came to mind. And inexplicably, it was familiar. When he managed to fall asleep, a noise woke him up. He turned on the light of his bedside lamp, and he didn't see anything unusual. However, he felt as if someone was there watching him. He turned off the light again and tried to go to sleep. He pulled the blankets over his face as if a piece of cloth could save him from a ghost. He squeezed his eyes shut tight and repeated to himself several times that there was nothing there. It was just his imagination. The next morning, he asked his father if he could review the recordings from the camera in his room. He had noticed something strange in the night and wanted to see where the noise had come from. The two went to their father's office and looked at the images on the computer. Everything seemed normal. James would appear sleeping until suddenly he got scared. He turned on the light and turned it off again, and he covered himself in between the blankets. His father asked him why he was hiding, to which the boy replied that he had heard a noise and that he had been scared. He didn't understand why nothing could be seen in the images. He was sure that someone had passed by. His father brushed him off and told him to forget about it. That could have even been some animal in the street. But James was sure that was not the case. Something had happened there. After thoughtfully finishing his breakfast, he went out for a walk around the neighborhood. It didn't seem the same. None of his friends were out. No noise from nature could be heard. Everything seemed to be abandoned. James went back to his home, and when he arrived, he got a big scare. In front was the pale blonde girl from the day before. The girl told him not to go in, and James, full of fear, yelled at her, telling her to get away from his house. That girl scared him. His face was full of spots, long nails, and his clothes were very dirty. It seemed that he had fallen into a puddle of mud. Just then, a car horn startled him. James turned around and saw that it was the car of one of his neighbors. The whole neighborhood returned to normal, and that girl had disappeared. What was happening? It was all too weird. With fear, James entered the house and saw that his parents were talking to a man. They introduced him and told him he was a doctor. The doctor shook hands with the miner, while he still didn't know why such strange things were happening. Why was there a doctor at his house on a Sunday? He asked his parents if something had happened. He wanted to know who was sick. His parents, avoiding answering, asked him why he wasn't playing outside with his friends. James said he had come in to get a glass of water. His parents accompanied him to the kitchen to drink, and affectionately went with him to the front door so that he could go back outside to play. He noticed that his parents were trying to get him to leave. They didn't want that he hear their conversation with the doctor. He left the house confused, and his group of friends were waiting for him near the door. They looked at him strangely. He asked them what was happening. His friends looked at each other and replied, "James, what happened this morning?" The boy didn't understand how they had found out. It seems that the news had been published all over the neighborhood. He told them what happened, and all of them were wide-eyed. One of the boys told him that the doctor who had just entered his house was an exorcist. An exorcist? James didn't understand anything. Did they really think that there was a demon in that room? He said goodbye to the boys and decided to go back into the house. He wanted to find out what the parents and that man were talking about, but when he entered the living room, his parents asked him to stay in the kitchen. They were talking about grown-up things and they closed the door. After 2 hours of anguish, his father opened the door and motioned for him to come with him. James was scared. He didn't understand anything. He got to the living room and looked at his mother. She seemed very nervous. Her hands were shaking, and she looked like she wanted to cry. Her father rubbed her back and tried to calm her down. The situation was becoming more and more distressing. His father, with a broken voice, told him to go to his room for a moment. James was more and more surprised. He didn't understand anything. Suddenly, without explanations, they told him that he had to go to his room. But he obeyed. They accompanied him, and just as he entered, the door closed behind him. And he heard his mother shout on the other side, "No, it's too soon!" James' heart raced. He yelled with all his might, "Mommy! Daddy!" The lights in his room began to flicker. And little by little, everything became dark. Furniture was fading, and his parents' screams receded. He couldn't do anything. It was as if he was somewhere else. The room was empty. There were only walls and some curtains. He walked over to them and pushed them away. In that instant, he could see his friends strangled with their organs out and their eyes black. James couldn't stop crying, heartbroken. He didn't know where he was. He didn't understand what was happening or why he was there. Suddenly, he heard the voice of a girl crying. Could it be his little sister? The room had become a long corridor with a door at the end. But where was he? Where was his sister? He reached the end and opened the only door there was. Inside was the pale blonde girl he had seen on the street, holding her little sister. "Leave her!" he yelled at her. The girl smiled, which made the young man shudder even more. That had to be a nightmare. It was impossible that everything he was experiencing was real. His parents weren't there, nor his friends, just that girl, his little sister, and him. The girl with the sweet voice asked him, "James, do you know who your sister is?" He looked at her incredulously. "Why are you asking me such an absurd question? Of course I know who my sister is. You have her in your arms, and I order you to give her to me right now." Suddenly, tears began to come out of the girl's eyes. She was crying, and James was more and more lost. She placed his sister gently on the ground in front of him and gestured for her to come closer. She lunged to protect the baby when he realized it was just a doll. The girl looked at him with a sad face and said, "Those boys and girls, do you remember them? They were our friends. We were all playing together before that night happened, in which I disappeared forever. This baby was just an illusion of yours to replace me, little brother. What does it feel like to be in an insane asylum for more than 50 years? And only remember that my disemboweled body was behind the curtains." If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you on the next episode.